policy kind of recommendation that needs to be dealt with, but you saying, I have a cook stove, does not even approach the level of complexity needed to engage this problem. But that was a couple of years ago. I am happy to say that people have definitely progressed in how they're thinking about these problems. Now it's more, I'm working with my department as they're partnering with the business school to think about how we are creating the kinds of tools that social entrepreneurs need to grow their ventures. That is a much better way of approaching these kinds of global issues and global challenges. I have a cook stove is a very simplistic way of thinking about these issues, but I have a platform and a way to connect communities and ways to build trust and tools to help do that. And I think about it in a community-centered or partner-centered experience instead of just a student-centered experience. That is the kind of evolution that I think will be part of the revolution that happens within academic systems. So, I hit forward. Oh, okay. I totally am not from NSF, but as an engineer, I can talk about lots of interesting things that happen within the U.S. government. The National Science Foundation has been addressing this particular issue in an interesting way with a program called the Innovation Corps, or I-Corps. So instead of only focusing on the research impacts, National Science Foundation has been funding this program in order to essentially get at the business fundamentals and get engineers and scientists into addressing these kinds of things very early on. But they're doing it in a way that forces a kind of market analysis and research that typical scientists and engineers aren't necessarily required to engage first. Often people are like, oh, there's a problem, and this problem isn't really attached to a human, so I'm going to engineer myself because I have these tools at my disposal. I'm going to engineer myself a 40-pound toaster. Okay, would any of you buy a 40-pound toaster? I would not. I use that as an example because I had a colleague talk to me about a weapons plant that had to do something with all of their steel, and somehow the people within the plant decided to make toasters out of it, but they were 40 pounds and nobody would purchase them. But it's a classic way that academicians can often approach problems if you don't force people to do market research. And that's one of the things that's very interesting about how the I-Corps works. It forces these kinds of models of business model kind of planning and market analysis and all these other different things into an academic system to get people to think about whether their 40-pound toaster that they're inventing actually has a market, actually has a use, actually could help anyone. And when you realize that you need to spend time talking to humans, and I know engineers aren't always good at talking to humans. People often ask me, it's like, wait, you're actually an engineer? It's like, yes, I totally am. But I know this is not normal for the stereotypical engineer. But getting people outside of the lab, outside of the academic environment, and into a community-centered, partner-centered kind of modality requires that you introduce these new kinds of models. And I think I-Corps has been successful in doing this in terms of growing ventures and enterprises that are emanating from not just university environments, but kind of research environments generally. But I wanted to mention it as another model of this kind of work. Now, getting to USAID, many of you know us, many of you work with us. We can be fun and interesting. I love working with USAID. But in terms of our mission, partnering to end extreme poverty, promote resilience to democratic societies while advancing our security and prosperity, the part of this that always sticks out to me as the most important is the first two words, we partner. Because the ways in which USAID has partners and encourages others to partner, across stakeholders, across systems, across borders, I think is something that will continue to be absolutely necessary to the work that we do daily. In terms of how we've used that for some, I'm totally having fun with my slide advancing here. Thank you. In terms of how we've used that outside of the program that I'll talk more specifically about in a little while, the private sector and their role within this kind of partnership, there's a great example with our colleagues in Vietnam, USAID Vietnam. So they're partnered with Intel, Arizona State University to essentially create a higher education alliance that was very focused on essentially building up the human capacity necessary to work in the semiconductor industry with Intel in Vietnam. They were going to build a chip plant. They wanted to make sure that there was sufficient talent at a wide variety of levels to engage it. And they partnered with Arizona State University to essentially train 240 faculty on Arizona State's campus, but then another almost 3,000 people in a kind of training of trainers activities that were within Vietnam to essentially help build the capacity to advance this kind of high-tech type of partnership. This isn't unique in terms of how the private sector has partnered in development generally, but I think what is interesting about it is how the university was part of it. And so, there would be kind of exchanges between Arizona State University and Vietnamese universities. There would be student exchanges, faculty exchanges, but all of it was in service of this kind of higher order goal. And I think that as we continue to imagine these kinds of partnerships, I think faculty kind of will shy away sometimes from the private sector related partnerships because they feel like things will kind of drive them in a particular direction. But if we all shy away from the level of investment that private sector is making in a wide variety of contexts, be they, domestic, foreign, et cetera, we're missing opportunities to essentially elevate the game and to back away from Intel, to back away from any number of other partners. You're backing away from being able to create platforms that have the kind of reach and essentially the kind of potential impact that could be truly powerful. Another one of these examples is the Global Accelerator Learning Initiative. How many of you feel like you've heard a lot about accelerators and we might be a little kind of oversaturated by accelerators? I like audience participation. Raise your hand, maybe, sort of. So what the Global Accelerator Learning Initiative is attempting to do is essentially solidify the knowledge around accelerators so that we're trying to get at some of the best practices around how this can happen. Accelerator models, you might have student competitions where they're doing a wide variety of things, trying to build new enterprises, build hardware, build software, and they kind of get into a boot camp accelerator. You've heard about these in a lot of places. And the question is, what are the best tools at what stages to be able to actually advance an enterprise, be it social or not? And the Global Accelerator Learning Initiative is trying to essentially codify that language in partnership with the Asset Network for Development Entrepreneurs and Emory University, trying to find ways to bring together all of this research and state really strong lessons learned for the best ways to kind of advance the ways in which we build homegrown enterprises. So then, we're missing a piece of what's happening on this slide. I am with the Global Development Lab. And the two missions of the Global Development Lab within USAID are to produce breakthrough development innovations through our partners, and also to accelerate the transformation of the U.S. development enterprise as it relates to impact for millions of people. Oh, apparently, there's our logo. And as we do that in a number of ways. There's the Center for Development Research, the Center for Development Innovation, Center for Transformational Partnership, and the Center for Global Solutions. And each one of those is addressing science, technology, and innovation and partnership. The program that I run, the Higher Education Solutions Network, is really designed to harness the intellectual capacity and enthusiasm because students, they've got tons of energy. It's totally not fair. I'd like to bottle it and sell it, take it home, sell it to parents who have 2-year-olds. But really harnessing that ingenuity and passion to solve global challenges, but also doing it in the context of where the strengths of the university lie. And some of those strengths are within research. Some of it is within innovation. Some of it is also within kind of how you can change pedagogy and influence others to do that work as well. For us, the network includes 400 partner institutions in academia, civil society, government across nearly 70 countries. This was developed through a request for proposal that went out in 2012. It was the long, strange year that we actually managed to complete it and award it in less than a year. And what's been really interesting is how it's allowed researchers to engage with communities, engage with USAID, engage with the private sector on kind of new ways of identifying problems, new ways of approaching pedagogy, introducing solutions like sensors into the broader kind of lexicon, and how you think differently about how that work happens in community partnership and in context. One of those examples is our partner at the University of California, Berkeley, who has partners all over the world, including Jadavpur University in India, the Development Impact Lab. Some of the work that they've done has really been to think about kind of the innovation cycle in the context of hardware. One of the challenges I think that universities have is they kind of get stuck at the breakthrough, but thinking about how you actually do that deployment, evaluate the impact and demand, redesign and re-engage, scale up and monitor is not necessarily something that universities have had a home in, because the incentive structure is constructed so that you essentially kind of have the breakthrough and then you go on to your next breakthrough. And so what our partners in the Development Impact Lab have been doing is working on how you can actually complete this pipeline more effectively, not just within the university context, but with partners throughout the world. Some of these breakthroughs, as they have been engineering and piloting them, some of the support that we have provided has really been to validate in the field some of the approaches that people have been taking. And that early validation, I think, is something that universities need to take into account much earlier on. You know, we like to get the breakthrough and we like for it to be shiny, and as I said, we move on to the next thing. But how you get field-based validation early and often is incredibly important. Another of the partners that we work with, Social Entrepreneurship Accelerator at Duke. You know, I spoke about accelerator models previously. This particular model is actually a 3-year model. So instead of an accelerator being a boot camp for like 2 weeks, hey, come in, hang out with us, and goodbye. This 3-year model is really focused on how you can essentially grow enterprises within global health. It's funny, our first presenter actually put up 3 of the innovators that are within the Social Entrepreneurship Accelerator at Duke: Writers for Health, Operation Asha, and Neura Health, which are all enterprises that are around 6 years old, but they may or may not have grown out of a university kind of model. But what this accelerator does is, because it's 3 years, it allows for a significant amount of research to be done. So really taking advantage of the role that the university can play in codifying research and really understanding how enterprises can grow, what challenges they have, where their business models are going, what needs they have, and how university researchers and students can actually interface with them in a productive way. Because many students are looking for the kind of meaningful opportunities in the field, but often what happens is, like, somebody raises their hand and says, sure, I'll take you as a student, without really having a scope of work that helps them contribute the expertise that they currently have in a timely fashion to actually deliver results for the people that they're working with. What Duke has been able to do is work very closely with the entrepreneurs in context to say, what are your needs? How can we address them through both our delivery model of services for technical assistance, you know, through the business school, through impact investors, and through others, but then how can we also find ways to engage research in a way that helps you productively measure the impact of your work? They've actually been growing an evidence lab that helps people think differently about not just randomized control trials as a way of demonstrating evidence. Everybody can't pay for a randomized control trial, and it's not appropriate for everything. And so what new methodologies and tools can a university develop that actually helps address some of these questions of impact, that helps actually get an innovator that's in a developing country context who doesn't have access to the mortality data from a hospital that they may be partnering with? What are some other ways that they can help demonstrate the evidence behind their approaches? So then finally, before the red light goes off on me, one of our other partners through the Higher Education Solutions Network is the International Development Innovation Network. And at the other end, see, there's my red light. At the other end of the spectrum of kind of social entrepreneurs who are kind of really advanced 6 years into their work, there's how you build the kind of capacity to have local entrepreneurship, local engineering, and local capacity built, regardless of literacy or numeracy. And the International Development Innovation Network has been piloting these kinds of we call it creative capacity building trainings for the last number of years. And where the investment from USAID has supported them is the ability to essentially put all of these tools and methodologies within a box. So it's not just our partners at MIT that are doing this work, but essentially many people who are interested in essentially building out kind of creative capacity in a country, in a community, can do so. What's really fascinating about how they've approached this is I went to visit them when they were in Tanzania, finishing up a design summit. These design summits typically last about a month. And as they were doing this design summit, it brings together engineers, community people, people who are educated in developing countries, people who are educated in the U.S., and really brings them together for a very intensive experience. And this is a very different model of kind of building capacity. We think of it typically, because we are university-related people, we think of it typically in a classroom setting, but this is a fundamentally different kind of experience. And what's interesting is how they progress through to pedagogy in a way that essentially teaches people how to work in teams, how to think about kind of customer-related and market-related research, how to think about problem solving, how to get to a prototype and iterate on that prototype in a way that essentially builds confidence in a capacity so that whoever goes to the summit, as they go back home, some of them continue working on the kinds of problems and prototypes that they've been working on, but some of them think differently about how they can engage their community in designing things for their needs. One of the stories that Amy Smith, who's the leader of this program, tells is how, you know, they went to a community and did this creative capacity building, and there was a woman at the end of it who was like, at the beginning of this, I feared the hammer because I didn't know that I could use it. And essentially, they had created sufficient agency so that she felt like she could solve her own problem. And what do we want for any student, regardless of whether they are within our university or not, but the ability to have the agency to solve their own problems? And I think the kinds of tools that our partners at the International Development Innovation Network are creating help do that. And so they're trying to codify that work with different research to help demonstrate kind of the pedagogical approaches that they've taken, but they are also continuing to support a wide variety of summits, including one that's supposed to be in Brazil in July. So just very quickly, in terms of some of these very simple lessons that we think about in terms of university partnership, I think that a lot of times people want to focus on just kind of what I have versus what strength somebody else brings to the table. And it's really important that as we look at these opportunities for internationalization, that we focus on each other's strengths, but not just come to the table with an already baked idea. I think some of the things that I see as we talk about these kind of internationalization efforts is where you're trying to build partnerships. Lots of people come with things already baked. And if you come to me, if Jason comes to me with an already baked, pick a food. What's your favorite food? Okay, if you come to me with an already baked apple pie and we haven't had a discussion in the front where I tell him I'm allergic to nuts and he puts walnuts in that crust, he's just happily poisoned me without really appreciating that we could have co-created that more effectively. And I think that a lot of the times the challenges that people have as they are internationalizing and thinking about these ecosystems is they come with things already baked and already done. And I challenge you to think differently about what you bring to the table and how you bring it to the table as you're encouraging, partnership with yourselves, with others, creating kinds of programs so that you actually have co-creation happening on the front end. And then finally, one of the quotes that our partners use often is that if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. As a classically trained engineer, I am often guilty of wanting to go very fast because efficiency, yes, we want the gears turning, we want to go. But one of the things that I've learned myself personally, but also that our partners have learned, the ability to go together through that co-creation has taken us so much farther. So thank you all so much for your time. I look forward to your questions at the very end, and I will see the floor.
Thank you very much, Ticora, for that overview of the Global Development Labs and basically a network of networks. I know there are several programs and projects they've been working on in Brazil, so that's maybe something we can talk about more in the Q&A time. Especially liked your comment about how important it was to learn how to work in teams, because as many of us know, you can bring these groups together, multidisciplinary groups, that itself can be a challenge. But then once you get them together, it's even a greater challenge sometimes learning how to communicate, and that's a skill that students can learn and professionals can constantly learn.